Them Eat Bread. Welcome back to Let Them Eat Bread, and thank you to all the people who wished me well last week. Apologies that there was no show. I was under the weather for the better part of a week, and I didn't really have any energy. Plus, I was kind of gross, so we really didn't want me baking bread anyway until I was fully recovered. So thank you guys for understanding. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. There will be no show next weekend in observance of International Holocaust Memorial Day. I fast during that day, and so I won't be filming. But there won't be a show that week, but there will be a show the week after, which is the first weekend of February. So we will have brand new topics to talk about and a brand new bread recipe to bake on that day. But in the meanwhile, I was really craving toast this week, so I wanted to take it back nice and simple, simpler even more so if you have a standing mixer, which is what I'm going to be using today, just to make it super simple, super easy. Let's make bread super easily, right? If we can make it. And by the way, we really only have 4 ingredients for this bread. We have yeast, salt, sugar, and flour, and water. Sorry, 5 ingredients. It's embarrassing. Anyway, all you really need is those 5 ingredients. You can do this by hand if you really want to. I'm going to be using a standing mixer just because it's making my life a little easier. And we're going to have 2 lovely loaves in your bread tins. Now, a quick note, if you don't have bread tins, that's totally okay. You can make this as a free form. The only thing I'll say is you just need to be really careful about shaping your free form loaf. Or if you have another dish that you want to use, for example, like a pie dish or a baking dish, you can kind of make some impromptu bread tins with those. So just make sure whatever device you're using, whatever you're using to shape your loaves in any kind of way, just make sure it's thoroughly buttered, so or lubricated with oil, just so you know the bread doesn't stick to it when it bakes. All right, guys, that's it for the intro. Let's get started.
All right, first thing you're going to do is you're going to take half a cup of your water and put it into a small mixing bowl with a lid. Next up, we are going to take our sugar and just put that in to the same bowl, to all of our sugar. Next up, we are adding our active dry yeast to the mix. Then we are going to give this a quick whisk with a fork just to get the sugar incorporated, and then we're going to cover and set aside for 5 minutes, just like so. Now, during the 5 minutes, you can do a number of things if you want, or you can just wait for it to rise. You'll know it's done because there'll be a layer of foam on the top of the yeast mixture. Next up, we are adding our flour to our mixing bowl here, and we are going to add our salt as well. Once you add the salt, be sure to spend some time making sure that the salt and the flour get to know each other pretty well. On screen, Ben, you look like you're really struggling there. You good? Okay, we're good. All right, so you're going to let that combine for about 30 seconds or until thoroughly combined, whichever you see fit. After that, we are going to add in all of our water, but add the water without the yeast mixture first. So add the water in first, and then right afterwards, you're going to add your water and yeast mixture. Now, once it's added, you are going to stir these together to get a shaggy dough, or if you're using a standing mixer like I am, until the dough really comes together. Now, this is like kneading on a board, right? So add flour as necessary and scrape down the sides of your bowl if you're doing this as a bowl to make sure that all of the dough is getting worked. You'll know it's done because you'll have a nice tacky but not sticky dough for you to manipulate. Now that you have your dough, we're going to put it into an oiled or buttered bowl and cover it with foil and a towel, and then set our timers so that it can rise in peace.
All right, we have finished making our dough. It is in the warming drawer. If you don't have a warming drawer, don't worry about it. Just put your bread somewhere it's going to be nice and warm, or at least room temperature, provided the room is between 70 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay? So, that being said, I've already set a timer for about an hour. I'm probably not going to talk through the whole hour, so just make sure that you've set your timers for an hour and come back to your bread in about an hour, or more importantly, when it's doubled in bulk. If for whatever reason it gets there before an hour, that's fine. Just make sure you're checking on it so that it doesn't overproof. Because if it overproofs the first time or the second time, it can make your bread come out not the way you want it to. All right. So we're going to talk about some political subjects. If you're sticking around, great. We'll be back with that in just a minute. If you're not, I'll see you in about an hour. Either way, we're about to get going, and let me just grab a quick sip of water and we'll get to our topics. All right, so the first story I want to talk to you about today is a little bit of nerd news. I don't know if you've been following the ongoing saga, which is being known as OGL 1.1. And so let me just back up and give all the context that I need to give, and then I'm going to explain my take and kind of give you some context about what's going on. So Dungeons and Dragons is a popular role-playing game, the 5th edition of which is considered, quote, the most popular role-playing game. I don't have the stats on. I'm just going to roll with that for now. I'm also a player of Dungeons and Dragons. I really love it. I have 2 groups that I play with. But there was Dungeons and Dragons is not its own company. It's owned by another company called Wizards of the Coast. Dungeons and Dragons is not the only game that Wizards of the Coast makes. They have a bunch of board games and other role-playing games that they own. Now, Wizards of the Coast is owned by another company that you're probably much more familiar with, Hasbro. And they make board games, toys, all sorts of stuff. And so Wizards of the Coast has this agreement with third-party creators. And you used to have this agreement, and it was called the Open Gaming License. That's what OGL stands for, 1.0A. And it says a lot of things, but ultimately what it says is if you create a module or an adventure or something else, you can brand it D&D and you can sell it, and Wizards of the Coast is not going to collect any royalties from it. You are set to sell that and make a living off of that, and that's totally okay. We're just kind of appreciative that you're advertising D&D, and that people will actually go in and buy the books and buy the official modules and things like that, which makes Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro lots of money. And by the way, these companies are doing well and have continued to do well. But a couple months ago, Wizards of the Coast decided that they were going to revoke Open Gaming License 1.0A. And it's an interesting thing about that because there's actually some good contract language in there that makes it seem as if that it is irrevocable. So that's kind of the first problem. The second problem is really what comes afterwards. And so there were drafts of what 1.1 was going to look like. And the drafts that came out, the leaks as it were, looked pretty bad for these third-party content creators, and essentially said, "Hey, we're gonna steal everything that you have, or we're going to collect large royalties on it, and say that you can't advertise it as D&D, or you can't advertise it as D&D." And so, this created a problem for lots of people who have kind of made their livelihoods doing this. And so the real question is, why is this happening, right? And I'm going to get to that a little bit, but there was a large backlash from the community, and it's actually quite interesting because Dungeons and Dragons, which I'm going to refer to as D&D, I don't want to keep saying it, D&D has an online subscription platform that Wizards of the Coast owns. It's called D&D Beyond, and essentially it allows you to have all the rule books and your game and whatever, but all virtually, and you can buy it in the virtual store and all that good stuff. And so the players and the content creators reacted. So several people were saying that they were going to sue Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro. Lots of individual players were canceling their D&D Beyond subscriptions, which generates money for Wizards of the Coast. And so we're starting to see that the market has reacted to this, right? And so Wizards seems to have played their cards incorrectly in this sense. And just today, actually, there was some commentary from Wizards of the Coast, and they're releasing a 1.2. Now, I haven't had the time to read through the entire document, but it does seem promising. But ultimately, this entire saga could have been avoided if Wizards of the Coast had just left 1.0A on its own, right? There was no good reason, and I use good reason in that context for a very specific reason, because the reasons they gave were pretty weak. The first reason they said was the license was being revoked so that no discriminatory content was created created from the game. To which I say, was anyone doing that? The second reason they gave was, oh, well, we want to prevent people from using Dungeons and Dragons for things like NFTs and crypto-based games. And again, I ask, was anybody doing that? Look, there's something you all should know. I work in the risk world as well as being a privacy lawyer, and in the world of risk, you actually have to have a risk before you can apply a fix to it. You can't apply a fix to a non-existent risk. So if Wizards comes out there and says, hey, well, we want to prevent these things, you actually need to give some substance as to, like, is this happening? Could this reasonably happen? Have you seen people moving in that direction? That's why you're acting now. Has it happened in other genres that you've seen and preempted? You got to give something, and they just didn't. The answers were woefully. The response that Wizards gave was woefully inadequate, and so the backlash was fairly swift. So I said I would get back to why this is happening, and I'm here. So capitalism ruins everything. Ben, that seems like a very large leap. Okay, hear me out. The primary thing that changed between 1.0a and 1.1 was an addition of royalties. The only reason you would add royalty clauses to the contracts that you have with third-party creators is to make more money. And so this is either someone at the top of Wizards or someone at the top of Hasbro saying, we need to make more money off of Dungeons & Dragons. We can't just allow people to enjoy this thing. We have to say, we have to find new ways to make more money. We have to make more profit. We have to generate more profit for our shareholders. By the way, Wizards and Hasbro, publicly traded companies, their CEOs are required to generate more money for shareholders. Their board is required to generate more money for shareholders, right? Ultimately, this is how the world goes around, and unfortunately, D&D is getting caught up in this. Now, this saga is far from over, and I actually think that if Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast were interested in some of the objectives that they claim they were, which again, I don't believe them, I actually think there's better ways to go about it, right? So an interesting comparison, additional nerd stuff. If you were kind of conscious during the time when Disney had bought Star Wars and LucasArts and Lucasfilm and all that good stuff, then you probably noticed that there was an interesting kind of change of posture about the Star Wars universe. So Disney came in and they said, hey, everything that was labeled Star Wars up until this point, other than the movies and the things that LucasArts and Lucasfilm produced, no longer canon, right? You can't call it, you can't say that it's part of the Star Wars universe as we are creating it. You can still have it out there. That's fine. We're not going to touch anything that's been done in the past and whatever. But from now on, we give exclusive rights to what can be called Star Wars, right? Hasbro or Wizards could have done that. Could have said, hey, everything that's out there now and all content that isn't generated commercially, which is to say that people generating things on their own and then selling them for a small fee or giving them away, that's all fine and kosher. However, for big organizations that, or organizations that make over a certain amount of money per year, from now on, you need to pay us some amount of royalties for the usage of the D&D name and the D&D system and so on and so forth. By the way, the other thing they could have done is just do exactly what they did, but instead of have the royalties be 25%, which is totally ridiculous, they could have lowered it to something like 2%. Because truthfully, what happens with a lot of these things is that there's not a huge group of content creators out there who make decent sums of money. You could ask them to pay into a system where they license it. Now, I'm not saying that they'd be thrilled with that, but if you were looking to make more money, you could have done it incrementally. You could have taken smaller approaches. You could have taken the Disney method. There are lots of ways they could have done this. The reason it comes down to capitalism because it's all about greed. How much money can we make right now? How can, in the short term, we squeeze as much as possible out of the people who are already invested? And the way that you do that is either increase revenues or lower costs, right? It's the only two ways in capitalism that you have to make more profits. And so what Hasbro and Wizards decided was that they were going to really double down on the increasing revenues idea. And it just truly is so painful to watch because, as I mentioned earlier, D&D 5e is the 5th edition is the most popular role-playing game. I mean, it probably was before this whole saga started. Ultimately, you're destroying your brand. This is such short-term thinking. This is such a capitalist move to squeeze in the short term and sacrifice for the long term. And I just think it's absolutely what they're doing with a game that so many people know and love, and by the way, have played for generations. Dungeons and Dragons isn't new. It came out in the 70s. And by the way, the 20-sided dice and systems that play with fancy dice, they go back to Roman times. So it's not like Wizards invented this, or Gary Gygax invented this, who's founder of D&D. So this is a really bad move for Hasbro and Wizards. I really hope that at the end of this saga, whenever it ends, we get to an open gaming license that respects the content creators. And if the objectives that Hasbro and Wizards are talking about are real, let's give them the benefit of the doubt a little bit here. But ultimately, you need to go into it clear-eyed, and you need to understand what the community is looking for. When your entire brand is based on your community and the free advertising from podcasts and all the good that content creators do, chucking them under the bus is a terrible long-term strategy. And actually, I have a message here at the end for our content creators. There have been a lot of messages going around about, hey, we should all just say we are never going to create for Dungeons & Dragons ever again. And that's how we're going to show them. I think you miscalculated there, guys. And let me tell you why. The whole point of the open gaming license is to kick out as many people as possible who aren't going to play ball, keep the people in who are going to, and maximize profit for Wizards and Hasbro. So if you, as an organizing block, I mean, I don't know how organized this community is in terms of the creators, but let's say they are, right? Let's call them an organizing block. Again, benefit of the doubt. If you say that you're going to leave the table and never come back, then the other side has no incentive to negotiate with you, right? If, on the other hand, you say, hey, we're thinking about leaving and never coming back, but we have a bespoke set of conditions and we're more than happy. We're more than happy to come back if yada yada, right? Then there is at least some incentive on the part of and Hasbro to actually come back to the table and say, hey, we recognize we're losing here. We will negotiate in good faith. So, I hope that this, obviously, I hope this gets resolved amicably. I really hope that it just kind of goes back to the way things used to be. I think that was pretty solid for everyone involved. Lots of people play D&D. D&D is making tons of money for Wizards and Hasbro. There's a major motion picture coming out. I know I'm excited, and lots of other nerds are excited for. Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves. So it could have been a really good year for Dungeons and Dragons, for D&D, but it's not going to be now because of this. So creators, don't say you're leaving and never coming back because they won't negotiate with you. Hasbro, Wizards, come on, guys, what are you doing here? Don't destroy the brand in the long term for a couple bucks in the short term. It's really not worth it. Don't just get yours and close the door behind you. I know that's what capitalism tells you to do, but if you want more money overall, you need to stick it out for a long-term strategy. All right. I want to talk a little bit about the House Speaker fight. Now, I know I talked a little bit about it 2 weeks ago when we were kind of in the thick of it. Obviously, Kevin McCarthy is Speaker of the House now. And so it seems like everything has kind of settled out, which is fine. There's really not too much that they can get done. I think they are going to try and hold the government hostage over the funding, but we'll talk about that another day if we need to. The thing I actually want to talk to a little bit about is kind of the reaction to the whole speaker fight, either in Washington and kind of in America in general. What's really interesting to me, as someone who studied political science in college, is what we saw on the House floor in terms of all these votes was actually the closest thing that we'll ever get in America to like what a parliamentary system looks like. Now, admittedly, in a parliamentary system, if you can't form a government and you go around to all the blocks and they can't form governments, you have to have new elections. And we obviously didn't do that. Like the whole country didn't get to vote again. But we did see coalition building, right? And this trade-off. Hey, if you give me this, I'll give you my vote, right? Because the vote in that case is pretty powerful. Now, I don't know how many of those promises are actually going to get fulfilled once all the dust settles. But it's an interesting piece of history for us to examine, because this is actually fairly normal in lots of countries. And for the reactions that I saw in the U.S. amongst people who don't typically follow this a lot, and among the media, they seem totally bewildered by it. And honestly, it's not particularly bewildering, but what it is, it's certainly more unique in American politics than you would typically have, right? Because again, we're used to, the party kind of has its structure, it knows how things are going to go going in, they get power, they set up, and everything works. But I actually think that this is really good for democracy. Now, at the end of the day, do I think that Matt Gaetz and Kevin McCarthy had that much difference between them? No, not really. I think it was mostly a fake fight for attention and cameras and whatever. But I actually think that we should have fights like this more often, because what it allows you to do is create small, very powerful blocks that can essentially control what gets done. And we saw this with the Tea Party, in 2010. We see this actually all the time in democracies around the world. We're going to talk about Israel a little later and how fringes are controlling huge amounts of what gets done in Israel. But at the same time, you could have a small group of Greens controlling what's happening in the English Parliament. And, name your country, name your parliament, it doesn't matter. The idea is the same. So, for example, if you had a group of democratic socialists, who most of them are really just social democrats, or progressives, or whatever you want to call them, your happy group of choice, you could have them band together, say like 20 of them, and say, hey, we're not going to give our vote for the speakership unless we get certain demands met, or we're not going to give our vote to important bill X, Y, or Z unless we get what we want. And this would be a really excellent way to force the hand of the rest of the government, because ultimately, unless they're willing to cross party lines or make other sorts of backroom negotiations, which sometimes they will, right? Let's not be naive here, right? There's a lot of corporate giving, and corporations ultimately want stability, so they may allow their servants to cross the aisle and to help out in terms of these battles they would otherwise lose to outside forces. But you have to try, right? You really do have to try, because it works in parliamentary systems. So what I would say, AOC and crew and whoever else, Bernie Sanders, I hope you're watching. I hope you were listening. I hope that you learned something, that you would say, no, we're going to fight. We're going to fight in public. We're going to make we're going to hold things up. We're going to make it uncomfortable for people so that we can get things to the American people, because politics is not about comfort, okay? The whole point of politics is policy. If you're not passing policy, then you're a useless politician, as far as I'm concerned, right? So find a policy that a bunch of people agree with, Medicare for all, a universal basic income, whatever, raising, increasing the money that Social Security gets, whatever the issue is, people who will not back down unless you get a promise that it's an affirmative vote, a roll call vote, right? You got to show where people are, right? So the vote knows for sure, and then move it forward. This was a learning opportunity, and I hope the people who had the things learn things. And by the way, for us on the outside and for organizers and such, I hope you learned a lesson too. Hey, people that we select for office, that we endorse, do our best to hold them accountable in saying, when you get into office, this is the bill you need to hold up. This is what you need to demand. And if you put enough people in there who do that, eventually you will create a caucus that has power to, or to actually get some of those concessions enacted. And so I really hope that, and I've advocated personally for a parliamentary system in the US. I think it'd be much better. But this is a little taste of it. You can have kind of parliamentary, events occur in a presidential system, and this was an example of that. So I really hope that we see more of this in the future. I think it's actually the best way to break the status quo and to really get stuff done. So there's a lot of protests going on in Peru right now, and the state has responded with disproportionate amounts of violence. It's really uncomfortable to look at, so I really don't recommend you watching videos of it. It's really crazy what's going on down there. There's lots of reports of live rounds being used. It's not pretty. And people are pissed. So let's step back for a minute. Why are people so upset? So Pedro Castillo, who's now the former Peruvian president, was the Peruvian president, was a farmer who essentially, and a teacher, and essentially came from nothing. He was an organizer, and people rallied around him as someone who could break the status quo. And so there was a genuine grassroots movement behind him. He was a real leftist candidate. He was elected into Peru's highest office. Now, it wasn't like a blowout victory, but it doesn't matter. He still won. And, OAS and all the organizations that typically throw suspicion at left-wing victories didn't say anything. And so it seemed like everything was going to go great. And then out of nowhere, these corruption charges came, and the evidence wasn't particularly, they weren't really offering a ton of evidence. And then all of a sudden, the military was involved in dragging Steve. And so because and poised to be a status quo breaker, people got really upset. Now, interesting is as a nod to kind of the established powers that be, Pedro Castillo took a vice president who kind of was more establishmenty, and I'm forgetting what her name is. I had it written down. I can't think of it right now. And so she is now president, right? And so what's really interesting is it looks like that there's kind of been this bloodless coup because, Pedro Castillo was VP, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, president is out and the VP is in. Now, there's a little bit more to it, right? There was, when he was elected, for anything. Now, there's a thing that you should know about the Peruvian Constitution. The Peruvian Constitution allows a president to be impeached for, what's the exact word? Irreparable moral failings or something like that. And so it's like really loosey-goosey, and like people were trying to impeach him from day one, over and over and over again. And it was never really coming to a head. And eventually Pedro Castillo just said, no, I'm done with this, and dissolved the parliament right before an impeachment election that actually looked like it was going to work. So did he do something that is illegal? Yes, he did. I'm not denying that. But he reacted in a bad way, right? So let's get that off the table. I don't think he should have dissolved parliament in the face of a impeachment election, right? He should have advocated to the people and tried to get the politicians to change their mind, and on it goes. But this was kind of the world that he was operating in. And so, there has been now this huge outcry from the public to put Pedro Castillo back in office and to allow him to govern, because he had a mandate, even though the mandate wasn't, particularly huge. And the crackdown, as the crackdown has gotten worse, you have, lots of area players starting to say, hey, like maybe we should kind of like have new elections because this is looking kind of shady and people are getting killed and protesters are trying to take over airports and things. I mean, even the United States came out and said, hey, Peru, like chill out on the killing protesters and stuff. So it's really ugly. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that there's a situation now to put Pedro Castillo back in power. There are some steps that I could see happening. I just don't know how that we could execute it, right? First, they'd have to drop the charges. Then they'd have to have new elections, because I don't think you could retroactively put him back. The current lady, again, whose name I forget, I apologize, takes him as a VP, and then she resigned. Again, I don't think it's going to happen, right? There's kind of an established order in Peru, and it seems that it's fighting back. So ultimately, I'm really disappointed in this. There was a lot of lefties, including myself, who were hoping that have a real grassroots American that was able to kind of test establishment pressures and was able to get things done and really help out, right? Because we've seen that real leftist policies can work. So Lula da Silva in Brazil, he raised a huge percent. I think it was like 50% of Brazilians out of poverty in just the short time that he had power, right? So there's an ability for these leaders to really transform these countries, but they have to be allowed to govern. They have to be allowed to implement these policies. And there was a lot of hope that this would happen in Peru, and unfortunately, almost all of that hope has been dashed now. So, it'll be. I would say keep watching this story, right? See how the players continue to react. I think, ultimately there's going to be some compromise somehow. I don't think Pedro Castillo will ever be president again in Peru without kind of a new grassroots movement. But there was really hope for a real change in Peru, and unfortunately, that's been dashed, and that's very unfortunate. All right, so as promised, talking about Israel. So Israel has formed a new government. They went a couple months without really having a functional government. They were continuing to have new elections. I think they had like 5 or 6 new elections. Bibi Netanyahu was going to be part of these corruption charges, and that never really materialized. And on it goes, and Likud is back in power again. Now, how did they manage to get back in power? Obviously, in a plurality of seats, right? So let's not, give them the credit they deserve. I suppose they did win a democratic election, but and what Bibi Netanyahu has done, and what the leaders of Likud have done for a while now, is they start to court these smaller, more extreme parties, and so really these coalitions, parliamentary coalitions, made up of a primary party and then lots of these little players. And so what it does is it gives these little players lots of ultra-Orthodox and very right-wing tiny parties have hitched their wagon to Likud. Now, Likud is being kind of drawn in. And don't get me wrong, Likud was perfectly happy being right-wing. Like, they're not like kicking and screaming doing this, but you're starting to see a much more vile set of policies being espoused by Likud and their majority, including you have leaders of the Likud party talking openly about annexing all of the Palestinian territories. And so this is really frightening, not just for me personally as a Jew and someone who supports Israel's right to exist, which, by the way, let's just address that for a second. I'm not saying that I totally agree with the government of Israel. I'm just saying it'd be nice for Israel to kind of not have to worry about war all the time. But I believe very strongly in the rights of Palestinians. So, let's not misquote me here. So this is really nervous for people like myself, but also obviously it's very nerve-wracking for Palestinians who are already kind of these ideas like, oh, we're gonna annex. In order for that annexation to happen, you would need an incredible amount of military power. And that's not to say it doesn't happen. This is actually, for me, the more scary thing is because Israel probably has the military might to do this. Now, they're going to piss off a bunch of people, and those people might be the governments of neighboring countries. So it's hard to actually go through it, or this is just talk. But over the course of Israel has become more and more authoritarian in how it deals with Palestinians. There was effectively there was an ethnicity law that was put into effect, I think 2 or 3 years ago. I'm forgetting the exact date. Essentially, over the years, the rights of Palestinians have shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. Israeli settlers are destroying Palestinians' homes without recourse. Palestinians go to Israeli courts for justice, and they're not given anything. And Palestinians are being murdered every day by Israeli soldiers in all sorts of scenarios. Shireen Abu Akleh is just one example, but there are tons of Palestinians who've been murdered in Sheikh Jarrah in their homes in order to, on top of their homes to have in the streets. On top of their homes to make way for Israeli settlers in the streets. Mobs of Israeli settlers have been killing Palestinians, and the military stands by and does nothing or protects them. So we're starting to see kind of this theocratic fascism coming from the right wing in Israel, and it's very scary for the people who are involved. But also, as an American, it's actually even more. It's not even more scary, but it's scary in a different way because America, the United States, essentially pledged to support Israel no matter what. Now, we kind of nominally have an obligation to a two-state solution, but if you look at the way that the United States has interacted with Israel in the past, we don't challenge them at all. I mean, even when Obama abstained from a what was the exact from a UN resolution that condemned Israel's behavior, Israel kind of went the Israeli government went totally bananas and was accusing Obama of anti-Semitism and all this stuff. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. Criticism of the government of Israel, concern about the government of Israel and the actions of the political leaders of Israel is not anti-Semitic. Never has been, never will be. Looks at rhetoric and says, we're not going to do anything about it, right? There was in this country where we fought to make sure Jews were safe. And I appreciate that. Now we have to fight to make sure the people who are living among Jews are safe, because we, as Jews, not all of us, right? But like the political leaders in Israel are weaponizing Judaism, which is a religion of peace and tranquility and love and really affection. You shall treat the stranger. Is a line of liturgy that Jews say every year, over and over and over again, right? It's something that most Jews have heard of. So, this doesn't extend to all Jews, but we have, we have created a situation where we have become the thing that we are most afraid of. We have started to treat the strangers in our midst as we were treated in other places. And truly, this creates a situation that is untenable and is potentially catastrophic for the Palestinian people. So I know no one in the Israeli government is listening to me or listening to any lefties in the US, and I'm pretty sure there are no US politicians that are listening to this, but if you know a US politician in your life or an Israeli politician in your life, please beg them, ask them, demand of them, treat the stranger like the native, right? Treat these people like you would want to be treated. Don't speak in ways that evoke genocide. Don't create laws that remove people from their homes. I'm so nervous for the people of Palestine, and I see that the vitriol of the Israeli political class just increases and increases and increases, and it never goes away. And I don't know if there's a political wing in Israel that's strong enough to oppose this. If there is, chop, chop, guys, you got to move. There are guaranteed seats for Arab lawmakers. Work with them. Do something. This rhetoric and these policies cannot be allowed to stand. There must be a unified front. The United States, Israel's allies, the UK, other nations need to come in and say, no, this is too far. You cannot talk the language of genocide. You cannot talk about destroying the homes of a living people. It's disgusting, it's dangerous, and it betrays everything that people fought for us Jews in during the Shoah. We cannot become the thing that was used against us. It can't happen. When Jews say never again, we don't just mean it. Never means never again means never again for any. No Jew, no Muslim, no Palestinian, no Arab. We have to mean it. We have to take action to mean it. All right, so I have a potentially controversial topic. Let's get our hands dirty, right? Love it. I want to talk a little bit about chatbot GPT and AI generated art, specifically, stable diffusion. And so if you've never heard those things before, allow me to bring you up to speed. Chatbot GPT is an online artificial intelligence chatting robot that you can type in various phrases of various kinds, and you can get it to respond. It can have intelligent conversations, and it learns and actually correct it. You can tell if it's right or wrong, and it will learn from your feedback, and it will propose all solutions. There was a recent study that came out showing that it could generate cover letters, and although the people who received the cover letters said that the cover letters were too formal, the study did not actually alter the cover letter in any way. They took whatever was spit out by the cover letter, slapped the name on it, and sent it to an employer to see if the person would get a call back. So what's important is even though the feedback was this chatbot is too formal, ultimately some of the candidates did get callbacks. And so, we're talking about a system that's incredibly powerful. And by the way, I use Chatbot GPT. I use it for mundane things like helping me create things in Dungeons and Dragons. Since I play a lot, it's easy to kind of have a robot tell me if I'm on track with something. Mathematical formulas. There's a ton of things you can do with it, and ultimately, it's a very useful tool. And right now, it's owned by So their mission is to allow AI to play for everyone, which is a proud of it. But there are questions that will come up with it, and I want to address those a little later. But let me introduce Stable Diffusion first. So AI art isn't necessarily the newest thing, but it is constantly evolving, getting better. And the newest version of AI art is Stable Diffusion. And Stable Diffusion is just a different way of using formulas to generate quote unquote artwork. Even just me calling it artwork video, like totally disliked and mean comments or whatever. But fine, whatever. Essentially, if you go into a website, and so there's a bunch of them. There's Midjourney, there's Night Cafe, there's a whole bunch. And honestly, if you just look up AI art generator in Google, you'll easily find one. And so you click Stable Diffusion as your method of creation, and then you pick a style. Some of these websites will give you the opportunity to do a style, like a sepia style, or a cute style, or a video game style, or a 3D style, whatever. You get the point. And then you just type in some words. Rabbit in a black hat, just for example, right? And it was just Chinese New Year, and it's Here's the Rabbit. Whatever. Let's just we'll just say it's a rabbit in a black hat, right? Or a black rabbit in a white hat. Whatever you put in, it will attempt to create an art. It will attempt to create an image for you based on the style that you chose, and it's taking lots of art that's published and unpublished throughout the web, and it's indexing those, which by the way is a computer term for kind of things, and then category by of category. And using that information that looks similarly enough to a rabbit and a hat, that being a certain color and the hat being on the rabbit, right? And so, and if you haven't given it an idea for a background, then it will just give you what it thinks the correct background based on what a rabbit and a hat, where rabbits and hats typically interact. So maybe it'll give you the circus, maybe it'll give you a green field. Who knows? Doesn't matter. It's just an example. So there's lots of concerns about AI artwork, and one of the concerns is an intellectual property. The images that are being used to generate this art probably were used without paying royalties to the actual artists, so the artists are not getting compensated fairly. And then the second set of concerns is, hey, this might be used to put artists out of business. And by the way, Chatbot GPT, there are some concerns that that'll happen for that too. What Chatbot GPT can do is it can code. Now, this is really interesting because typically we expect people to be coders, right? And so if this robot can code, then all of a sudden there's concerns that some of those people don't have jobs, or that the workforce required is more minimized than it would have been without Chatbot GPT. And so I hear all of these concerns, but I actually want to take a step back. I want to think of these as not things to be feared, but actually really exciting innovations in what work means. In theory, now, caveat, right? Side real quick, caveat. Capitalism is not going to allow us to work less. Capitalism is not going to allow us to reap the benefits of an automated system. It's going to funnel all of that wealth up to the very top. Capitalism does, right? It generates wealth at the top and strangles those at the bottom. Just the way the system is. Okay, back to mainframe. But if you think about what work could be, what work should be, then what we can say is there is a formula out there that says if you generate an image that uses certain artwork, then that artwork gets a royalty. It can be like it could be whatever. There is a just number out there, right? The AI uses something, and by the way, for commercial use that there has to be payments, and so it doesn't have to be. Actually, lots of legal solutions here. Essentially with the Spotify model, just not as disadvantageous to the artist as the Spotify model, but you get the same basic idea, right? Every time you play a song, every time you generate a piece of art with a certain rendered artwork, the images that were used to create that image receive a couple bucks or a couple pennies. And so with that, you could allow for artists to continue to get paid for the work that they do, and you could incentivize artists to keep making work because A, it'll make the AI better, and this system without having to work as hard. We could fundamentally transform. Instead of saying, hey, we're afraid this is going to cost us our jobs and that corporations are going to push us out of the arts, we could create an equitable system that says, we are going to make it so you don't have to work as frequently. You don't have to rely, you don't have to rely as much on gigs and commissions and things like that. We're going to use AI, but in the using of AI, we're actually going to compensate you for the work that you've already done and for the work that you might do in the future, so long as you allow our device, our tool, which is the Stable Diffusion, to create images from it. And you can work at a system where credit's given. There's lots of ways to do this. You could say, actually, instead of you having to code 5 days a week, we're going to have Chatbot GPT do all the coding, but we will still need quality assurance for all the code because we want to make sure that it runs in the systems that it's supposed to run in. We want to make sure that there's no errors that the chatbot missed. We want to make sure that if the code is tying two sets of data together, that you actually map in where the data is supposed to go, because you really shouldn't share the data with the chatbot. On and on it goes, right? And so you could say 5 days a week, you're going to work 3 days a week, and for the 3 days, all you're going to do is you're going to do QA, right? You're going to code yourself and to use the code from the chatbot. Same thing with, some of the the legal field is actually a really cool place where Chatbot GPT could be used to help make the lives of lawyers easier. And instead of saying, hey, we're going to put some lawyers out of work, you could say, hey, actually, what we're going to do is, instead of putting you at work, we're just going to have you review the items that comes out of the chatbot. Same thing for people who write policies or procedures in organizations. You get the basic idea. Any profession that has to do with art or documentation of any kind, you could effectively partially replace some of these robots. And here's the thing. Automation is getting better. It's getting better all the time. And I don't know when this will happen, but eventually there will not be a ton of need for labor as we understand work as we understand it right now. So the question always has to come back to, what do we do as a society to make sure that even though work becomes less and less necessary, we still allow for people to meet their basic needs? And one of the answers that I've seen and that I really love is, hey, we should all get a universal basic income, or we should be assigned a robot that does our job for us, and we should reap the benefits of that robot. We have fewer people who work, right? Everyone gets a set of basic income. They get these basic rights. And if you want to work, if you feel compelled to work, treat you much better because because the work then becomes necessary, right, for the society as opposed to necessary for the individual to survive, right? And so society then places a greater emphasis and a greater value on work. So for those people who do want to do work, they can find places to do work, and that work that's actually necessary can be given the value it deserves to the community, as opposed to, scraping by to survive. Could, using the automation technologies we have now and that are in development, fundamentally change the way people live and work throughout the world. Are we going to do that? Probably. Box over there, it's really just a step to the right. Capitalism isn't going to let that happen. What's the solution? Get rid of capitalism. You need a smarter person than me to figure out how to do that. But ultimately, there are opportunities automation to take advantage of the automation that ourselves, and then we should mandate, we should force those in positions of power to give us generate money without us. We need to create a situation where work is only necessary in certain cases. Not everyone has to work, and that we reimagine and redignify what work is in our daily lives. I think Chatbot GPT and Stable Diffusion are actually really amazing starting places for some of these conversations. I would love to see the community come together and decide that we're going to go a separate way with work. Again, not really sure that's going to happen, but there are ways to make this a more equitable world, use these automations to do so. And one day, I hope to be able to see that future. The last thing I want to talk about today is immigration. And immigration has always been a tough subject. I honestly don't think it's that complicated, but ultimately, what I want to talk about is how immigration now. So if you recall, during the pandemic, during the Trump administration, he enacted something called Title 42. He did it by executive order and essentially said, we have this provision in the law that says if there is a national emergency, we can turn, or a pandemic or something like that, we can turn away all immigrants at the border until the event is passed. And for Trump, it was really just a ploy to do something anti-immigrant, and to give red meat to the base. But Trump is no longer the president, as you are well aware, or I hope that you're well aware if you're watching this video, in 2023. And the law has, and he did make some genuine strides to do so. However, a court said, hey, you have to uphold Title 42 until certain conditions are fulfilled, and then you can get rid of it. Now, we look like we're actually close to. The thing that's interesting about this is that the Biden administration is making moves to enforce Title 42, to ramp up enforcement of Title 42 across the border. Biden doesn't believe in this, and Biden has said that he wants to get rid of it. And why is he doing it? And I can't look into his mind to see what he's doing. I think Biden's a true conservative at heart, so I don't know. Maybe he actually wants to do this, but I don't know for sure, and I don't want to make any assumptions. What I will say is this is the path of least resistance, right? Just do what's always been doing. Now, he said that he's ramping up enforcement of it. So those things clearly don't work together. And so I don't want to talk about that particular part of it. Obviously, the first piece of advice to Joe Biden is get rid of Title 42. But there are actually some concrete things that Biden can do right now without having to talk to anybody else to improve our immigration situation. And by the way, these are options that have been on the table for the president. This is not unique to Biden. But, these are just kind of things that he can do because it's going to be gridlock in politics. There's not a ton that he can do otherwise. So the first thing he could do is he could recruit more immigration judges, or he could declare more ALJs, administrative law judges, to be immigration judges and move them to the border, right? Part of the problem that we have on the southern border is that there are too many people coming across and this process. Not too many people coming across. I mean, that's a positive or negative or whatever. Too many, I think, capacity that many of these processing centers have, there are just more individuals trying to be processed than there is the ability to process them at any given time. Okay, that's what I mean by too many. I'm not saying immigration is bad, yada yada. Okay, so one of the things that could improve immigration and get people into the country is to simply just immigration judges, right? Use the resources that you already have at your disposal, and just get people processing immigration faster. Don't use military force on people, right? Help people get in, because ultimately, why do people come to the U.S., right? And I've talked about this before. I'll say it again. People come to the U.S. because they are running away from something else and they think there's opportunity here. It's the same reason everyone has ever immigrated to America, literally ever. They're running from something, or they think there's opportunity here. That opportunity here, y'all. There are doing. It would be really cool to bring those people in, and by the way, to treat them properly, right, and to document them and all that good stuff. The second thing Biden can do is dismantle these detention centers, because ultimately they are taking up space. They're pretty much inhumane, and the vast majority of individuals who receive court dates actually come back for those court dates. They go and they find something to do in the while, but they come back. And look, you get a bunch of identifying documents from those individuals as they come across the border. So if they don't for the court date, fine, that. That's the rules, right? The thing that I think that is really funny about immigration is that people talk about it like there aren't any rules around immigration, which is fundamentally false. The U.S. has tons of rules on immigration. There's a whole title in the U.S. Code dedicated to immigration. And so it's not like there are no rules. What you have to do is enforce the rules we already have, but you have to be compassionate as well. Enforcing the rules here, because that's not going to work. You're going to find a way. The wall's going to work are just delusional. Walls have never worked. Even with walls and moats and alligators, whatever, people have always found a way across. Always. Not just America, anywhere else. Castles were not impregnable, okay? Lots of kings and queens and lords and ladies got assassinated in their castles. Having walls was not going to stop someone from getting in. They really wanted to get in, okay? You can open walls, it's not going to work. It's never worked, okay? And so, A has options at his disposal, resources he has to get rid of. Way, Biden, you should do that, and come in and do what they want to do, which is to work here and to build a life and build a family. Not that long ago, there was fairly cyclical migration. Came to the U.S. to work, and then they left once they were done for whatever season. So people would come here seasonally. They'd pick crops and then they'd go home. There was nothing wrong with that until we decided to make a big stink about it. What's interesting, actually, is that the most recent numbers on immigration show that more people are emigrating from the U.S. than are coming in. So, the people love to show these images of huge numbers of immigrants sitting at the southern border trying to get in. And the truth is, there are waves of people who come based on certain things, on certain events that are happening in their countries, or for seasonal work or whatever. It's very easy for cameras to stare at the groups of people sitting at the southern border and say, oh my God, this is terrifying. Look at all these people. What are we going to do? Yada, yada, yada. But it's much different. Actually not a problem. This is something that if we have concern about these people coming in, we actually have the ability to process them and to get information about them and to hold them accountable in case they decide that they don't well, they don't want to come back for their court dates. We have reasons to do that. And by the way, you can make the southern border safer for migrants as well as you do that, because as soon as you make getting in easier, you undercut the cartels who use smugglers to get people across and use individuals to get drugs into the country. Now, will the cartels still try and use drugs into the country? Yeah, but people will feel a lot less pressure to ask a cartel to help participate in the drug and human trade. It's just to get in line, get a ticket, and come back later, right? And so, to the borders, making more room for processing as opposed to detention, all that is going to help. So, again, Biden, you said that you were going to be better on immigration. There are ways you can do it all by yourself. Just go forth and make immigration better. You have the power to do it. Just do it.
All right, now that our dough is back out of proofing, and mine was still a little sticky, so I am going to be using flour on my hands to kind of get this into a nice ball shape. You're going to need it for a couple seconds. Add a tiny bit more flour if you really need to, if it's really soft and fluffy like mine. And then after that, we are going to divide our dough into 2 equal pieces. One of mine is bigger than the other. And next, we are going to shape them. So the first way I'm shaping it is to essentially roll it out like a log, and that's our first way of shaping it. But there's a second way that I'm about to show you in just a second. So that goes in, and then next is going to be kind of a more traditional rolling shape. So you're going to pat it down into a circle. And then once you've patted it down into a circle and it's kind of as flat as you want to take the sides and fold them in so that you have 2 curved edges and a round edge, and just roll it up like a log and then put that in. That's your second way to do. Now we're going to cover these with wrap that you should oil, I forgot to, and towel, and let them set for an hour before scoring as appropriate, chucking in an oven at 400 degrees for 35 to 55 minutes. All right, guys, that is all for this week. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching this video, guys. If you liked it, throw a like on it, share with your friends, and subscribe for more of our content. You can also find all of our videos and clips on youtube.com. Just search Let Them Eat Bread and you'll find all of our content. All right, guys, see you next time. Bye for now.